Welcome back to the Mark Moses Show, only right here on Sports Radio 95.9 The Fan. And right now here on the Club 52 hotline to talk a little ACC football and a new season of basketball as well. His name is Chris Graham of the Augusta Free Press out of the great Commonwealth of Virginia. Chris, how you doing today, man?
Man, good day in Virginia. Good day to be in Virginia this time of year.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I know we'll start with this with football. Florida State, undefeated, ranked second in the current 14 playoff standings. They're hosting UVA this weekend. What's the outlook for Cavalier fans? Let's not get embarrassed. I mean, what is your take going into this game?
You know, a few weeks ago, I think Virginia fans may have thought, hey, we can be competitive in a game against Florida State. When Cavs started 4-2 and had wins over Louisville and Pitt, played pretty tough in the games against UCLA and BYU. Even the loss to Duke was nothing to hang your heads over, so to speak. Duke is maybe the best team in the Coastal Division, one of the better teams in the ACC this year. But then, the devastating loss to North Carolina, it wasn't devastating on the scoreboard, only a 1-point loss, but the way that game was lost was reminiscent of some bad times past. And then this past weekend, Georgia Tech really blew the doors off Virginia. A 35-10 game, wasn't really close from the get-go. And so now Virginia comes in a wounded team with a 4-5 record, a 3-game losing streak, and their head coach's job's on the line. I
was about to ask you that, Chris. Mike London, 2 disappointing seasons back-to-back. Now, like you said, they were good early, but now they've lost a lot of games of late. Does this guy keep his job going into 2015?
It's really tough at this point to think that he does unless something strange happens in these last 3 games. Florida State on the road, Miami at home, Virginia Tech on the road. A lot of folks had thought, and I was among them, that Virginia needs to at least be bowl eligible at the end of this regular season for Mike London to keep his job. And when they were 4-2, it looked like there was a lot more than bowl eligibility at stake. They were still in the mix for the Coastal Division title at that time. But now at 4-5, with those 3 games still left on the mix there, you have to win 2 of 3. A big win this weekend, which is not likely in the cards from Virginia's standpoint, but a win this weekend would certainly be a feather in the cap there, get them closer to 6. And also, if you're able to win a game at number 2, defending national champion Florida State, that would itself maybe secure Mike London's job. But outside of that, then you've got, if you're 4-6 heading into Miami and Virginia Tech to finish the season up, I think that the moving veins may be aligning for that weekend after Thanksgiving.
Well, here's the thing. I used to cover Virginia. That's how I know you, Chris. I'm just letting our listeners know. Virginia reminds me of Stanford, where very hard academics. So it's very hard to get some of the top recruits to go there. Look, I couldn't even get in there, all right? I'm not going to lie to you. What type of coach would you go for? Because you still have limitations with what you can recruit, right?
That's right. And Virginia's in a similar place as Duke and Stanford, which, Duke is on a high right now. David Cutcliffe is winning games there, but for a long, long, long time, Duke could not win consistently. Steve Spurrier won for a 3-year period back in the 80s. There were a couple of blips along the way, but, Duke until Cutcliffe came along had a long, long tradition of losing football. Stanford is on a high right now since Jim Harbaugh, and after Jim Harbaugh, they've kept things going there. But Stanford also has kind of had ups and downs over the years, and both also, have the admissions issues. You can't recruit the way everyone else recruits necessarily at schools like that. So, but there is a blueprint. Stanford and Duke are winning right now. You can recruit. There are players out there that can both succeed academically at a school like Virginia and also play quality football. And actually, George Welsh did that too. George Welsh, who's now seems like 100 years ago that he was the coach of Virginia, but for about a 20-year period of time, George Welsh had Virginia football at or near the top of the ACC for an extended period. And so there is a blueprint. It's just, it's tougher than it is at some schools.
We're here with Chris Graham. Augusta Free Press covers ACC football and basketball. What's your take on Florida State then? You gave us the UVA perspective, but Florida State, they're not killing people, but they're still putting up a lot of points. I mean, what's your take on Florida State?
Yeah, my take this year on Florida State is it's not last year's Florida State team. Last year's Florida State team put up a lot of points and didn't give up a lot of points. And I remember talking with Jimbo Fisher before the season at the ACC football kickoff, and one of the questions was talking about his offense and how they really emerged last season. And he said, his answer was interesting. He said, all the attention on our offense, our defense was really solid last year. and nobody paid attention to that because of the numbers that Jameis Winston and the offense put up. Well, Jameis Winston and the offense are still putting up big numbers, but the defense has proven to be a little susceptible this year. That's surprising. There's a lot of athletes on that side of the ball, but it may be inconsistent play, if we could say. And so that's what makes Florida State more vulnerable this year. They've come back from two 24-7 deficits, NC State and Louisville, against teams really that they shouldn't have been down 24-7 to. So I'll give the offense credit for being able to dig out of those holes, but the defense is putting them into some of those holes. And so I don't know that this weekend they have to worry so much about a Virginia team that averages around 410 yards of total offense a game. It's really struggling still 9 games into the season to find its identity on offense. But you've got games with Miami and Florida still coming up that could be interesting. Of course, presuming that there's no upsets along the way, that national playoff. I think this Florida State team is vulnerable against a really top-quality team, but they just haven't seen one of those quite yet on their schedule this year.
You bring up Miami. They're going to take on Florida State, like you said, November 15th in prime time. What are your thoughts on the job Al Golden has done? Because I think it's a little under the radar with the job that Brad Kai has done with that offense.
Oh, it's under the radar because this team started off so slow. At the ACC football kickoff back in July, we voted Miami to win the Coastal Division, and actually, there were some people voting for them to actually upset Florida State in the championship game. I was not among them, but I thought, looking at the talent on that roster, that finally, this was the year of Miami was going to be back to where, or close to where Miami had always been back in the 80s, 90s, even the early 2000s. And so then they start off slow. They lose the opener to Louisville. Actually lost I think it was 31-13 was the final on that one. They also had an early season loss to Nebraska. And so, that's why they're under the radar, because they started off so slow. But, to me, they're the best team in the Coastal Division. They may not win the conference or win the division because, Duke right now has the advantage. Even though Miami won the head-to-head, Miami had a couple of early season losses in ACC play. But to me, Miami right now is playing the best football in the Coastal and maybe even the best football ACC-wide.
Well, wait a minute. The best in the ACC? Are you staying by this comment?
I'll stay by the comment. Yeah, right now the way everybody's playing right now, I think Miami is playing great on offense. Their defense is playing dominant. At this stage, not looking at the entire body of work of the season, but the way teams are playing right now, maybe the last couple of weeks, I think Miami's playing the best football in the ACC. I really think that game, Miami-Florida State, that could be a barn burner of a game, and it wouldn't surprise me to see Miami pull the upset. Oh,
it's going to be awesome, but we're not there yet. What about Clemson? 6-2, 5-1 in the conference. People kind of left them for dead after they shot themselves in the foot in Tallahassee a couple weeks ago. What about the job that Dabo's done with that team?
Oh, you talk about, he lost Sammy Watkins and he lost Taj Boyd from last year's team, that record-setting offense that Clemson had. And they've really not missed a beat. Now, that's another game where perhaps if the schedule makers had been kinder to Clemson, and Clemson and Florida State were playing in November instead of early to mid-September, that game may be playing differently. Clemson was working in a new quarterback. They were still undecided at who to start at quarterback, and now they're rolling offensively. I really like Clemson and the way this team is playing, and I think that Clemson fans probably do regret that they didn't have a later shot at Florida State because, that game was really, Florida State really kind of handed them that game in a lot of different ways, and Clemson didn't want to take it. The 3 shots inside the 5 that they struggled with, and I think I got a field goal and a couple of turnovers. So, but Clemson has come back from that point and played some really, really dominant football. And I'd love to see them play Miami. I think those are 2 pretty talented teams. If you could just have sort of a Final Four of the ACC, you'd have Florida State, you'd have Clemson, you'd have, I think, Duke and Miami as 4 pretty transcendent teams this year in the ACC.
Could you imagine if Dabo started the freshman quarterback from day one, Labor Day, and then he doesn't get injured? How good would that football team be then, when you really think about it?
I agree. If that's the case, and allow that young man to grow. He's already, started playing really good football after getting a couple games under his belt. That's the tough decision to make, though. And Dabo's not the only coach to really struggle with. Do I go with the experienced guy who's been in the program, who maybe isn't as talented as the young guy, but has that experience, he's gotten the reps over the years, or do I just go with the young talented guy and take a couple lumps early? A lot of coaches struggle with that decision. Most of them seem to err on the side of going with the more experienced guy to start with. But then as the season goes on, they see that the young guy is the guy that they really want to get in there. So in that sense, I can't fault Coach Swinney for going in the direction he did, but I'm sure he would like to have that decision back.
We're here with Chris Graham, Augusta Free Press, out of the Commonwealth of Virginia. I always have to do that right because it's not a state. I know the rules, man. I used to pay taxes there. The 14 playoff, you look at it. Right now, we got 2 SEC teams. We got a Pac-12 team. Then we got Florida State. I've made the case if Florida State loses, I think they're out of the 14 playoff, and I think the ACC is done as well. Would you agree with that statement that it's up to Florida State to run the table or the ACC is in trouble?
I think that's exactly right. The schedule this year is not kind, and it's not Florida State's fault. You schedule Oklahoma State to open. Oklahoma State has in recent years been more powerful than they've been this year. They're on the fringe of the top 25. They've been down in the bottom part most of the season, but that still isn't a marquee win like it could have been when you scheduled it. The Notre Dame win is nice, but outside of that, the schedule is pretty weak, and it's not Florida State's fault. It's the ACC itself. The conference hasn't produced a Miami team that was projected to be a top 15 team, if you want to say, and they're not there. And Duke's towards the bottom of the top 25. When Florida State beat Louisville, they were at the bottom of the top 25. They also had a loss to Virginia early in the season. So it's not Florida State's fault, and also that Florida is still struggling. And so a win at the end of the season over Florida won't necessarily be something else to add to the resume. All these games you schedule with the thinking that obviously they're going to enhance your resume. But yeah, a loss in the next couple of weeks, from now to the end of the season, I don't think that Florida State can really come back from that with the strength of schedule being what it is.
All right, before I let you go, I know you're busy, man. We have ACC hoops. I mean, the new college basketball season's right around the corner, probably a week away. Who's your contenders, man, in the conference right now going into the season?
It's 4 teams at the top of the ACC, and then it's everybody else. And the 4 teams at the top are all in the top 10 of the national polls. Those are the national preseason polls. You've got Duke, you've got UNC, you've got Virginia, you've got Louisville. And it's hard to make a case that any of those should be fourth among those 4, but somebody has to be. And you're talking about a Duke team that, they lose Jabari Parker. They add 4 kids that are called one-and-dones. So they may take some lumps early. Mike Krzyzewski's schedule is usually a pretty tough November for himself. And they may suffer a couple of losses early, but January, February, you're not going to want to be around those guys too much. Virginia, they're defending ACC regular season and tournament champs, returned 7 of their top 9 guys from last year. A nice recruiting class coming in. They should be back in the mix. Louisville comes back with a team that itself was in contention for number 1 seed last year and didn't lose a lot from last year. And Carolina, I'm not quite sure why Carolina's getting the top 10 accolades they're getting, but Roy Williams doesn't recruit duds. So I think any of those 4, then Syracuse on the fringe of the top 25, and then, after Syracuse and maybe Pitt, if you want to throw them in that mix, then the rest of the ACC is kind of left fending for the scraps that are left. But, man, it's going to be an interesting race this year with all that power at the top.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. That is going to be awesome. And here's my final question then. Can we just add Florida and Kentucky to the ACC? Wouldn't that be cool? Because there's no other teams really in the Southeastern Conference for basketball. What do you think of my proposal, man?
I'm all for that because as a writer who covers college basketball way too many nights a week and gets to go to these gyms and talk to these coaches and watch these games in person, all you'd be doing there is giving me even more fun as far as that goes. But, man, and that would be a great fit geographically, obviously, and from the basketball playing perspective. Wow, we're just excited, I know, from an ACC perspective, to have, in addition to adding Louisville and Syracuse and Pitt the last couple of years, now we're adding Louisville. If things could only get better, and just, I know, and from my perspective, we have a game in Charlottesville with Louisville coming to town. I think it's February 7th.
Ooh.
And and Louisville, actually, from Virginia's perspective, they're the team that Virginia gets twice every year. With the bigger conferences, it's tough to play home and home with everybody like it was in the old days. So you get a couple of teams that you play guaranteed every year home and home. And Virginia and Louisville, fortunately for each other, get to play each other home and home every year. So a lot to look forward to in that respect.
Oh, that's going to be awesome. His name is Chris Graham of the Augusta Free Press. Chris, how can they check you out on social media?
Of course, AugustaFreePress.com, on Twitter at Chris Graham AFP, And I tweet a lot, so probably too much. But follow me there, and you'll see what my thoughts are on the various issues of the day.
Including wrestling, right?
Including a little wrestling. Yeah, I have to work some pro wrestling. Or wait, we're down south. We can say wrestling.
That's right. Wrestling indeed. Chris, thanks for coming on, and I hope I can get you on again.
Thank you, Mark.